established nature of the university, but also of the role that the province plays in general with respect to its leadership, its natural resources, and certainly the economy. We're very pleased at this interesting time of the academic year by your presence. There's many people to acknowledge, but I want to acknowledge especially the President of the Student Representative Council, who's here, and we're very pleased about your participation. Colleagues, the focus of the discussion will be on the context, rationale, and perceived or planned impact of the G20 in South Africa this year. You will know that formally South Africa is the only formal member of the G20 group from Africa. And that also brings its own expectations and escalates the performance, if you will, or the participatory nature of the country. The role of higher education is very prominent within all these discussions, and science as a cross-cutter links to almost all of the working groups that have been identified by the G20 group. So colleagues, again, very, very pleased to have Daan du Toit with us on campus today and tomorrow. He has oversight of and leads South Africa's science strategy internationally. He is the principal convener of the G20 Research and Innovation Working Group for the year. Daan started his career in the South African government with the then Department of Foreign Affairs, where he trained as a diplomat. Since 2002, he's been attached to the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, where he has notably served as the department's representative in Europe, based in Brussels for many years. In 2014, he was appointed as the Deputy Director General, responsible for international relations and cooperation at the department. He played a very central role, amongst many others, in the establishment and management of the European South African Science and Technology Advancement Program, or as many of us know it, as ISASTAP, and has represented South Africa in diverse multilateral forums, such as the OECD's Global Science Forum, the Group on Earth Observations, as well as the BRICS Partnership and numerous other engagements. Also related to the African Union,
partnership. I'm delighted to be back at the University of Mpumalanga. Sadly, I was thinking the last time I was here was 2018, when we had hosted the National Science Week, first day here, and it's been very exciting and encouraging to see the progress, not only in the terms of the infrastructure development here on the campus, but in the department we've also been following the progress academically and also research, and I think it's to all of your credit, the rising prominence of your university within the South African science system. So I'm from for those of you who don't know how we organized in government, I'm from a department which we call the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. If you follow government affairs closely, you will know that before the last election we were science and innovation. So after the election we had the focus on technology added to our portfolio. Our we report to the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, which is currently Professor Blade Nzimande. Before, you will recall, he was also Minister for Higher Education. But in this new administration of government, I think in recognition of the strategic focus of the importance of science, technology and innovation for growth and development in South Africa, the President decided to create a single department with a fully fledged minister. So as Aldo said, within that department, I head the team looking after international cooperation. And of course, in 2025, a big focus for us is South Africa's presidency of the G20. And I really value this opportunity to speak to you a bit more today about G20, its focus on science, technology and innovation, and specifically the program of the South African presidency, because as Aldo said, your university will be hosting a very important meeting of a structure which we call the Research and Innovation Working Group of the G20 in a little bit less than 2 months from now. And as we see the university as an integral partner in hosting this event, I think it's really appropriate that we spend some time talking about the strategic context. Go more than 20 minutes or so. I will try and avoid too many government jargon and bureaucratic words, because that's what we do in government, and try and keep it as lively as possible, and look forward to really take any questions or comments from you during the discussion. So I'll start. I think it's always very good, even if we think we all know what something is, to just briefly reflect on what is the G20, then share for you what is the focus of South Africa's presidency. And I think it's also very important to just spend 1 or 2 seconds reflecting on what's our national interests, because we are all citizens of this country, we are all taxpayers or future taxpayers, so it's a very legitimate question to ask, what's in it for South Africa? Why do we invest so much? Why do we disrupt your life on campus in hosting this event? So I think it's important to focus on that, why this is important for South Africa. The G20 is a complex animal with different structures, and many of which interface with science and education, so I want to focus about that. And then conclude to look at a calendar of events, and then you will also see where in that calendar do the Mpumalanga events fit in, and then I'll conclude with some reflection on the role of universities. So if there are any international relations or political science students, of those of you with an interest in the room, I think the first important comment, if we ask ourselves what is the G20, is to say that it's a forum. It's alliance, you could say. It's a gathering, but it doesn't have legal personality. So it's not an intergovernmental organization such as the United Nations, for example. So the G20 is a forum where the members meet and discuss, but since they do not have any legal personality, they also do not make any legally binding decisions. That's the one important aspect to bear in mind from the G20. Nevertheless, those recommendations and pronouncements has a lot of moral and political value. I think the other comment to add, and you may have followed this in the past, and this may again be prominent in the South African presidency, is that the G20 operates by consensus. So for anything to be agreed as a formal G20 document, and I'll tell you a little bit more about later about how the process works, it means everyone has to agree. Otherwise, it cannot be adopted. So again, if you're interested in diplomacy, international relations, that makes for quite a lot of tricky negotiations. So the G20 formally comprises 19 countries. I'm going to list, I'm not going to read them, they're on there. South Africa is the only African country. It was G20 because the European Union was the 20th member. But since last year, we now have also the African Union as a formal member of the G20. And the name is not going to change. It's not going to become G21. They're keeping the G20 terminology. I think this is very important for us as Africa to have a much stronger voice of our continent within the G20. So Africa is now fully represented by South Africa and the African Union. Every year, the country which holds the presidency, and the presidency works on a rotation basis. So last year it was Brazil, next year it's the United States, this year South Africa, so there's an order our countries volunteer themselves to take the presidency. And one of the rights which the country which has the presidency, and by presidency means basically you host the meetings, you chair the meetings, and you set the agenda. You can invite host countries. You can invite countries which are not part of the G20 to participate in the meetings. And there are different criteria which are being used to select those countries. So our government decided that for this year, and I think it was interesting to mention them here because it means you will see, if you're around in May, some of these delegations on the campus, from Africa, countries like Algeria, Egypt, and Nigeria, Singapore in Asia, United Arab Emirates, also other European countries, Norway, Switzerland, the Netherlands, they will all be joining and participate in our meetings as special guest countries. I think the last point to emphasize, just in terms of the strategic significance of the G20, is that collectively it represents more than 85% of the GDP of the world, more than 75% of international trade, and it's more than 2/3 of the world's population. So we had to, as a government, and I'm using really the collective we, and after all, the government is also you because you're citizens of this country and participate in a democratic process, had to reflect, so what will be the theme under which South Africa will host the various G20 events in 2025. And we reflected on what are the values which matters to us as a country, and also what are the matters which we think matters in this world. And first of all, solidarity. We know that in our country, we like to use slogans like stronger together, strengthen diversity. So solidarity is, I think, much more than ever needed also on a global stage. You would have followed a lot of the recent pronouncements, the trade wars which are happening, rising geopolitical tension. So for South Africa, it was very important because that's what as a country we are committed to, is for countries to become closer to each other, not to pull apart, to focus on solidarity. Same applies to equality. Of course, 30 years later, 31 years now, since we've become a democracy, I think it's still, perhaps not on you, the younger generation, but on us, the older generation, we should be collectively ashamed that after 31 years of democracy, our country is still marked by massive inequality, associated poverty, and unemployment. So that is an ongoing struggle in South Africa, the fight for equality, but of course it's the same on the global stage, where the inequality between the global north, global south, Africa continues to endure, and this is a very important objective for our government to work for that greater equality on the global stage. And then lastly, sustainability, which I can see on your vision as a university. It really also speaks to the heart of your focus. Again, as South Africa, we believe that collectively as humanity, we should be responsible stewards of our planet, of all its resources. Climate change is a reality. Food security is a reality. Marine pollution is a reality. And these are all challenges we as a country need to confront. So that's why, under the leadership of our president, the theme for South Africa's presidency is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Now, one of the jargon which is very prevalent in international affairs and specifically in the G20 is Sherpa. Now, if you're in a province with lots of mountains, but if you're into mountaineering, you'll know that in Asia and Nepal and elsewhere, the mountain guides are often called Sherpa. That's where the word comes from. So since the G20 ultimately is the presidents who meet once a year, but during that year, their work is being prepared by the Sherpas, which are senior officials which are designated to sort of prepare and guide the work of the G20. So that's why in the G20 there will always be talk of the Sherpa track. Now there are tracks which are sort of, you can say, work streams, focus areas. There are 14 of those which are focused on specific thematic areas. And I think very important for us in this community is there's one which is dedicated on science, technology and innovation. There's one on education, which my colleagues in the Department of Higher Education and Training and Basic Education work on. I will not say much on that, but I think extremely important for us as recognition of the role of science, technology and innovation in society is that the G20 has this, for 2 years now, it wasn't always the case, focus on science, technology and innovation. And the formal name is called the Research and Innovation Working Group. Again, just to go back in history, if you were following global affairs 15, 16, 17 years ago, you'll know at that stage there was a huge global financial crisis. So the G20, its origins was in the financial and economic gathering forum. Over the years, it has sort of diversified with new focus areas. And since 2 years now, we have this Research and Innovation Working Group, which even if it's called a working group, it's really a senior structure. And ultimately, that's chaired at ministerial level by our Minister, Minister Nzimande. So I said, why does this matter for South Africa? What do we want to achieve? First of all, from a foreign policy perspective, we really believe as a country in the values of multilateralism, of solidarity. So for South Africa's leadership and everyone involved, this year is an important opportunity to strengthen the G20. Also to make it perhaps more fit for purpose. So there's a lot of review of how the G20 is organized, which we will be undertaking. But I think this matters to all of us because we do not live in isolation in this world. And for future world peace, for sustainability, a structure as the G20 is very important. The fact that we're the presidency and then the first African presidency, it also gives us an opportunity to shape the agenda, to make sure that the G20 focus on topics which are relevant for South Africa and the Global South generally. And I'll share a bit on those shortly. It's also an opportunity, and we should not be ashamed of this because this is in this country's strategic national interest, to really promote South Africa, our leadership, the standing of our country globally. And then lastly, very focused, this is an opportunity to also position national initiatives, national programs for international partnerships and investment. So it would be, and this I'm saying very frankly, opportunity for you as a university, if you do not leverage the fact that you will have all these international delegates coming to your university, to excite them, to interest them in collaboration with the university. And that applies to us as a country as a whole. And that's why for our government, yes, we'll be spending a lot of money in upgrading facilities, hosting these meetings, but the return on investment, if we do this well and if we do this strategically, should be far greater than that original investment we've made. So these strategic national interests also apply to us. So the theme of our working group is science, technology and innovation for solidarity, equality and sustainability. So that's what the science, technology and innovation track is focused on. And if you go below that level, we then had to decide what are the specific thematic areas this research and innovation working group will be focused upon. And we, as I've said, we followed on Brazil, so we wanted to make sure that we continue the work which was done in 2024, but these are also aligned with South Africa's national interests. And there were 3 overarching priorities identified. The first one, open innovation for sustainable development. And by open innovation, it's really mean it's the phenomenon that innovation doesn't work in silos. Innovation flourishes through partnership, and specifically public-private partnerships, university, industry, civil society, in the spirit of co-creation. And we believe that for us as a world, as a global community, if we're going to harness innovation to respond to all of our challenges, we need that open innovation partnership. Of course, it's easier said than done, because innovation also ties in with economic interests, etc. So you will know as well as I do that there are big competition for supremacy in artificial intelligence, fight over who's going to make the most advanced electric vehicles, etc. So we shouldn't be under an illusion that the world is just we all love each other and want to work together. There are real competitions, but I think generally, as humanity, we will benefit for greater innovation partnerships. Secondly, we wanted to focus on biodiversity. It's of course one of the attributes we have as a country, of one of the richest global locations for biodiversity. Biodiversity is an asset, but also we need, in order to protect it, to sustainably manage it, and even to extract responsible economic benefit from it, those need to be science-based decisions, informed decisions. And for that you need data, you need information. So we wanted to focus on how do we make sure that information on our biodiversity is harnessed, collected more effectively, and also made available so that we can be responsible custodians of our biodiversity enrichments. There are also a big focus on, consistent with our national priorities. Again, when I said for science to benefit all of South Africa, it must be an inclusive enterprise. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and how that translates into the science, technology, and innovation enterprise. That's one of the priorities. And then there are other areas such as artificial intelligence and science, Africa's human genetic diversity, and international cooperation in open science. So just a bit now again of the structure. So hopefully it would allow you then to understand where does the Mpumalanga meeting fit in. So the end goal, sort of the finish line, if this was like a race we engage with this year, is the 22nd and the 23rd of November, when there's what's called the summit, or the Leaders Summit, and this will take place in Gauteng. This is when all the presidents of the world, and who knows, perhaps President Putin, President Trump, President Macron, President Xi Jinping, they will all be invited. So there will be this world gathering of world leaders in Johannesburg to take stock of the work which has happened over the year. And also this meeting, which will be in Mpumalanga at the end of May, ultimately is going to feed into that meeting. Because these working groups all prepare that meeting. You know, that's what happens when world leaders meet. Often the outcome is sort of predetermined. It's been prepared over many months, and they make speeches and endorse what has been agreed in. So that's the end goal, the Leaders Summit. I've spoken about the working groups. There's also then there's the Research and Innovation Working Group. And then there are a number of task forces on a few strategic priorities. The one which I wanted to highlight, because our department is intimately involved in that, and that's artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. Then it's very important, it's always been for the G20, but specifically for South Africa, that the G20 is not an exclusive enterprise just for government officials, so there's also a number of engagement groups, and I'll say a little bit more about that, where different sectors of civil society come together and bring representatives from the G20 together. There are other initiatives which countries champion, and then also side events which are organized on specific themes to celebrate and to raise awareness of the importance of the G20. And to some extent, and actors to organize your own events as part of the G20 presidency. There are quite a number which are central to science. There's a group called Science 20, which is the academies of the G20 which comes together. Now, hopefully many of you are aspiring researchers, or some could well be established researchers, and if you know that one of the goals, if you're a scientist in South Africa, is to be elected to the Academy of Science of South Africa. It's a bit like being part of the Champions League of science in South Africa. And this is how academies are organized. Free from the governments, where the academies meet, and they reflect on what role should science play in the G20. And they give them the independent advice, unfiltered by the government officials, of what the voice of science is on the G20 agenda. There's also, and they will actually be having a meeting here, a special track for the ocean marine community. Of course, that's part of our global commons, the oceans marine area, so that's why those stakeholders are being assembled. There's one looking at startups, to connect startups across the G20. And then various others, business leaders, Business 20, there's think tanks 20, urban 20 is cities, there's a woman, a youth track. So these are all not government structures, but various events organized by these stakeholders. There's also a few other specific G20 science initiatives which will meet during the year. One is focused on what we refer to in the jargon as chief science advisors. So these are senior institutions or body which give government scientific advice. In South Africa, we have a body called the National Advisory Council on Innovation. So they will be convening a roundtable of G20 science advisors. Space is again one of the shared resources we as humanity have. So there will be a G20 Space Economy Leaders Meeting that will be hosted by the South African National Space Agency, which is one of the entities of our department. And then we have also decided this year to have a specific focus on the bioeconomy. Holistically, agriculture, human health, industrial application of biotechnology. And there will actually be a meeting during the Mpumalanga week of the G20 bioeconomy. And then various other side events which will happen throughout the year. One of the priorities, for example, Minister Nzimande is championing, is to enhance Africa's own capabilities for vaccine manufacturing. We all will recall the lessons COVID-19 taught us on how not to be dependent on pharmaceutical resources of others. There's going to be a big event with UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, on how do societies collectively manage transitions, social transformation. Our world is constantly changing. What does that mean on how we organize ourselves, humanity? One of the things I often have to say when I speak on behalf of our department is we are not only, and people sometimes mistake us for that, we are not only the department of the natural sciences, the physical science and the engineering, also of the social science and the humanities, which are equally important for us. And that's why there's this very important focus also on the social science. And there will also be a dedicated event with women and to promote women and girls in science. Tech entrepreneurs, digital entrepreneurs, there will be a meeting with Business 20 in Cape Town. One of the sort of key focus areas these days in international relations is science diplomacy. So the relationship between international science and international political and economic affairs. So there's going to be a big training program to prepare the next generation of African science diplomats, and indeed a dedicated young scientist forum for the G20, and a special workshop on the role of AI in African science. Now, I'm sure you all will agree that artificial intelligence and its progress is rapidly disrupting the way we do science, the way we do research, the way data is collected, the way data is analyzed. And it's very important in order to ensure that the knowledge disparities and inequalities do not widen, that we reflect on how do we build the capabilities within the Africa university science ecosystem that we optimally use this potential of AI to advance African science. And of course, there are all sorts of implications which AI has for the governance, the ethics of research and science, and I'm sure at your university you would have guidelines on how those tools can be used and when not. So I already said the end goal is November, the Leaders Summit. We had a first meeting of this working group 2 months ago, end of February, but 6 weeks ago, at the University of the Free State in Mangaung. So the next milestone for us is the week here in Mpumalanga, when we have the second meeting of senior officials, and there will be various side events throughout the week. The third meeting, if you then see the milestones building up to November, will be in September in our capital city in Tshwane, and that's when the ministers come in. And then they agree what the working group has done, and that goes into the summit in November. And in September, there will be various side events. I mentioned the Young Scientists, Women and Girls Science, and all the G20 ministers will also go for a day in the Northern Cape to the SKA site. So the meeting here in Mpumalanga, for us it's very strategic that it happens in May, because of course May is Africa Month, and specifically the 25th of May is Africa Day. And that is Africa Day because it's the day when the Organization of African Unity, which is the predecessor to the African Union, was founded. And of course the OAU played a significant role in also enabling South Africa to achieve freedom and democracy. So we are delighted that we can partner with the university and invite all our international guests on the Sunday, the 25th of May, before the official meeting start, to have a special Africa Day celebration. And there are various exciting programs, keynote speakers being invited, and that whole meeting here in Mpumalanga, and I think you're an excellent location for that. We really want to make it a celebration and a focus on African science. The sort of hard business of the meeting will be on the Monday and the Tuesday, when we will be, and I'll go into that now, because there are no secrets to actually tell you what we do when we are in these meetings. That's when the senior officials will be meeting. And then one of the side events, which will be very important, is a seminar for representatives of museums and custodians of scientific natural collections across the G20 to meet and see how we can enhance collaboration between museums and these natural history collections. Of course, that's such an important resource for knowledge. And we know that in many countries, including our own, museums and scientific collections do not always get the support they deserve. And it's a worry for us that there could be, as part of our collective heritage as humanity, some knowledge resources which can be lost if we do not invest in how we manage these collections. So that's why that's the University of the Free State. Was also a key priority for our government that the G20 events do not only take place in Western Cape and Gauteng, and that's why there's a deliberate effort to go around the country. And we also had sessions which we broadened in involvement with young scientists, indigenous knowledge holders and others, I mean, as we will do on the 25th of May here. So the other jargon word which I should explain is what we refer to as the deliverables. So again, if you just look at a timeline, the Research and Innovation Working Group, they're going to deliver something, outputs. And those are the ones which then are recognized in November by the heads of state and government. And why do we do this? I think it's important because otherwise we just have meetings for the sake of meetings. And even though there may be some intangible benefit in that, in just meeting people and building relations, you want to have concrete outcomes. So the concrete outcomes, this makes the G20 more tangible, it strengthens it institutionally, it also helps us to shape the global agenda, and importantly from our national perspective, it allows us to position ourselves for leadership in initiatives which we've identified through these deliverables. So the deliverables are the practical outcomes, and this is what we are working on. So remember, there were the 3 priorities. Under the Open Innovation for Sustainable Development priority, we are working to create what is a platform of platforms, which may sound a funny terminology too. By a platform, we mean a digital platform. And the idea would be that there is one platform which links all the different national platforms, which there are in the G20 countries, which contains information on innovation entrepreneurship. So the idea would be that you could go on this one website, and if you are working in forestry technology and you want to see which entrepreneurs, which companies, which researchers in Brazil, Argentina, Italy would be interested in collaboration and as a value offering, that you would be able to access it through this platform. So it's a digital knowledge resource. It's being led by our CSIR because they have something called the Innovation Bridge platform, which they've been working on for many years, and that is a tool which is there to link entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs with funders and potential partners. The second deliverable is we're going to have what we call a demonstrator project. But basically it's going to be almost like a hackathon. And it's been led by something Aldo was involved in a long time ago called the African Open Science Platform. The idea would be here to focus on a theme, and we've identified water resilience. And by water resilience, we mean management of water resources, but also the impact of flooding, drought on society. How can are developing like a problem statement, and then we're going to have this hackathon type event where we're going to bring together innovators, and there will be a national process how we're going to select them from the G20 countries together to solve this problem. Of course, will be a hypothetical problem, but water resilience is actually a real-life challenge. And that hopefully will show to us practically what can be achieved if, within the spirit of open innovation, away from political and economic tension, the partners of the G20 come together. So these are the two deliverables for open innovation. On the biodiversity, the first one is very wordy and very bureaucratic. But basically if you again follow global affairs, you will probably know about the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is one of the leading global multilateral agreements. There's also equally important the Convention on Biological Diversity, commonly referred to as the CBD. And what we want to do with this deliverable is to have a commitment from the G20 to use a number of regional science, technology and innovation centers to make sure that in the implementation of the CPDD, that is informed by science advice and scientific expertise. In South Africa, we have the South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI, who you may know as sort of the custodians of our botanical gardens. And is the one in Mbombela would be part of SANBI as well. So they are one of these centers, and what we want to have for the G20 commit is that we will invest and use these centers to make sure that through science we increase our capability to understand biodiversity. I already spoke about the Natural History Collaboration Seminar. This is really to improve specifically the way we look after our science collections. And then there is an initiative which is called the Catalogue of Life. And this may sound sort of funny to you, but it's never actually been done. There's not currently an existing comprehensive digital catalogue of all the world species. And there is an effort by a global partnership of which South Africa is part, called the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, to develop this catalogue of life. And we want, through the G20, make sure that there is political endorsement for this initiative, and that then also becomes a resource which is freely accessible to all. And then lastly, on diversity, equity, inclusion and accessibility, there are a number of knowledge products. First of all is the development of a compendium of good practices, and how do we want to use policy to make sure that the science enterprise is for all, with all, and by all. And our Human Sciences Research Council is leading this work. This will be a knowledge resource. Of course, as I've said at the beginning, the G20 is not a legal organization. It cannot make any legally binding decisions. You will know, those of you who will follow international affairs, that the first three words in this heading, diversity, equity and inclusion, is currently causing lots of tension and globally, including in some of the major G20 countries. So the G20 cannot prescribe to its members what it does. But we, as South Africa, because we believe in these values, we think that developing this compendium where the HSRC is going to say, well, in India they do this, Brazil they do this, in the UK this happens, we can all learn from South Africa, this is as a knowledge resource. Very importantly, we want to develop a set of recommendations which can be endorsed on science engagement. And by science engagement, we look at the holistic enterprise of how do we engage on science with the public. So this is public awareness and understanding of science, it's youth and science, it's citizen science, it's really engaged, making sure science is not on an ivory tower, not restricted to university campuses, and create a set of recommendations on how the G20 through best practice can advance this. I already said we will have a specific event to promote women and girls' participation in science, and then again a thematic portal which UNESCO will host, which will collect information, policies on policies that promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So I'm coming towards the end. So all of this work, those will be the practical deliverables. The way it works in diplomacy then, how do these things get communicated to our President and the President of States? It ultimately will be in that declaration which will be adopted in Gauteng in November. But before that declaration, there will be a declaration by the Ministers of Science, Technology and Innovation. This will happen in September in Pretoria, where all these things I've spoken about will be recognized, endorsed, etc. So that declaration looks at things like under the presidency of South Africa, these activities took place. It will reference the meeting in Mpumalanga. It will sketch the context a bit like I've done, etc. Very importantly, as I've said, this is a document which has to be adopted by consensus. So it means literally everyone has to agree with every single word, every comma, every full stop. We're having an online meeting next week, and then the hard work is really going to be here on the 26th and the 27th of May, where I will be chairing a meeting with then people like me from the G20 partners, and we literally will go through it. If you happen to walk past the meetings, you will see we go through the words line by line. Say, do everyone agree with this sentence? No, I don't agree with this word. China doesn't agree. France doesn't agree. We change. How can we advance? If you have ambitions for a career in this area, you will know that it works with the principles of brackets. So if in the beginning of the process, the whole document, and we try and keep it as short as possible, because the longer you make the document, the harder you make your work for yourself. And we spent actually quite a bit of time the past few weeks doing that first draft, trying to also anticipate what people will annoy people. So in the beginning of the meeting, the whole text, the whole 3-4 pages are in brackets. And as soon as you agree on a line or a word, you take the brackets away. And then our goal would be, it's probably not going to happen, but I mean the goal would be to leave Mbombela without any brackets. Probably there will be some brackets we deal with then in July, and in September there have to be no brackets, because otherwise there's no agreement. So I think first of all, and it may sound idealistic, it may sound, you may say, even a bit naive, but I think it's really important. It's not only government which hosts the G20, it's South Africa, and South Africa is all of us, and ultimately the government we're just your representatives. And this is an opportunity really to profile South Africa, to promote South Africa, to promote Africa, and our universities, for me, is one of the key actors which can be those ambassadors for South Africa. And I think your university, by hosting this meeting, really has a strategic and an important role to help us. We want to show the world the better version of ourselves, what we are capable of. That doesn't mean hiding things we're struggling with. It means open and frankly speaking about, but it's about showing them the values, the hospitality, the generosity, but also the capabilities we have. And throughout this year, whether it's through the May events and elsewhere, there is that very important ambassadorial role. You are also, as part of the collective knowledge resource of our country, a very important knowledge partner in terms of the input and the advice we get from your research groups, from different experts in the university sector. And we would really like to encourage you, whether it's on these topics I've spoken about, others, to also make sure that this agenda is one which you own and you discuss and you debate. And I think the universities has a very important role to play in providing that intellectual input into the overall G20 process. But then, as I've said, this also is an opportunity for different organizations, including yourself, to use the fact that the G20's eyes are on South Africa, that you will have these delegations coming here, to make the contact. And we're going to strategically, also we'll discuss with Aldo and his colleagues that opportunity is for that to be created, because for me it would personally be I know your university is already well connected internationally, but it would be a missed opportunity if there are not 3 or 4 new initiatives which come with involving your university, which will just come from the fact that you had senior science leaders visiting here. So you have that, I think, very, very important partnership, because those partnerships strengthen South Africa, and this is an opportunity to identify them. So, colleagues, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope it was of interest to you, and it helped to perhaps contextualize what the G20 is about and why we're coming to Mpumalanga. And I'll be very happy if there are any questions or any comments to engage with those.
Really just excellent, Mr. Toit. Thank you indeed. We are now much better orientated, if you will, towards the extreme strategy and impact of this process. So nationally, certainly, but absolutely for us, we continuously still refer to ourselves as a new university, emerging university. I try to avoid that because I feel that we are established now. We are new, but we are established. And this opportunity really will make it quite large. A couple of comments, colleagues. So we have an opportunity to engage 40 staff and students to be observers and or involved in many of these events. And we almost finalized in making an initial list of these to really also touch on the diversity of opportunities that this series of events in the week will provide. Let's get some perspective. There will be 600 people for 5 days on campus continuously in an average of 4 events every day, either in parallel or then the main event. This is really very large. So a great opportunity that we have to observe not only technically a policy-making process, but a global meeting in a place like Mpumalanga. So we are very excited about this. Secondly, the focus on biodiversity is very significant for our university. I won't say maybe directly, but indirectly, that was one of the choices, not only of the province, but of the university. And from an academic and intellectual input perspective, we have a great opportunity for that event, especially, and for others to make an impact. We are really very pleased also about the broader engagement. So, Daan will be aware, and you also, that we currently one of the main partners of the Alliance of Research Universities in Africa, ARUA, cluster of centers of research excellence in sustainable food systems. And the launch of this will take place alongside the G20 Agricultural Ministers meeting in Cape Town in September. So we are not part of the organizing environment, but we are part of that project, and by virtue of that, we will be made prominent in that. There's also various academics that play specific roles in many of the other streams currently going on, especially the women and girls in science, especially the science advice. You know, our Dean of Economics serve on the Presidential Economic Advisory Commission, for instance, etc., etc. And you would have seen the call internally for opinion pieces from students on the G20 that Professor Gumede is coordinating. So there are many components, colleagues, which we are very, very pleased about. I cannot resist to say, when you spoke about the Champions League of ASAP, we were very pleased to inaugurate our first 2 ASAP members last year, and we've nominated 5 for this year. So that is an important focus to honor that type of academic career trajectory, but also for us to be very engaged still for that collaborative opportunity. A last point is the opportunity for collaboration. Daan is quite correct. I am very pleased, and also what we've done, colleagues, as a collective, in our escalation, in our strategic partnerships, in our strategic partnerships for funding, for instance, etc. But really, we will focus very significantly on making use of that opportunity. May we allow for brief comments, questions, colleagues? We have to be finished in the next 7 minutes or so. And please just do a short introduction also. You can start.
Afternoon. I'd like to meet everybody in attendance, all protocol observed. I am Chobisi Danda, a Master of Science candidate down there for agriculture. Thank you for the stellar presentation. Thank you for the stellar presentation. We have learned a lot about the G20. Grateful. Personally, I would like to express sincere gratitude for the broadening of the venues. Came from in Bombela. I feel like it would solidify us as an institution internationally if during the proceedings of the meetings in November we have either President Vladimir Putin or President Xi Jinping just set foot on the wide wave. Thank you.
It's very good to have ambition. Of course, I do not control the diaries of any of those world leaders, but in the spirit, sir, of your comment, which I completely understand the spirit. I mean that is in a sense your opportunity in May, to whether it's the Chinese or the Russian delegation who will be here in full force, to impress them, so that when they go back to Moscow or Beijing or Paris or wherever, they tell their other structures about this exciting place, Mbombela, and the university. So you may not get them here, but hopefully, as I've said, the hosting the meeting here is going to be a foundation for further contact.
Godfrey, a Master of Science student. First of all, I just want to appreciate the presentation, Mr. And it was so insightful, especially for me, because I am a social geographer, also a human geographer. So I was doing research in my local place, and I was focusing on water service delivery. So I just wanted to make all the scholars in the house to say development can start from the local level. That is the fact, that is true, because local people are not developing. So with that, I also, for me now, I found an Insight Ecotech program in my community to say, come and consult, because one of the things that are happening in my community is that there's lack of knowledge, actually. So people don't know what they're doing. As us, as scholars, we research about things, we make research, we publish, all the papers in Google Scholar, all the papers in all the accredited journals. So we don't take initiative. We don't start something to say, let's educate these people, let's uplift these people so that they are aware of the environment, they are aware where they live in. So the second thing I want to talk about is the Sustainable Development Goals. So is this G20 aligning all the sustainable development goals to be achieved. This is where 5 years away for the conclusion of the sustainable development goals. So can you just touch on that a bit? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And first of all, just your first comment, that's exactly what open innovation should be about. And I certainly encourage you to continue the efforts you spoke about, and look out for the call we'll do on the hackathon for water resilience. So yes, at a high level, this, from a South African perspective, one of the objectives of our G20 presidency is to reinforce the global commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, and hopefully make a contribution to help us to get closer to them. You are right that there are many predictions that we will fall dismally short as humanity in achieving them, and I think that's important to be very honest and frank about. But South Africa's presidency gives an opportunity for that critical assessment, and then to try and install some positive momentum towards that. And every opportunity for that should be used, because globally we are in times where countries are increasingly focused on their own narrow agenda. We know that there has been a number of steps back from, for example, the fight against climate change commitment and others. So from a South African perspective, we remain firmly committed to those SDG objectives, but it will not be easy. And it requires every effort and investment. Otherwise, we will be failing the next generations completely.
Possibly they won't achieve.
Well, that's quite possible that some of them will not be achieved, yeah. I mean, I would be arguing against the science. It's an interesting, your question is an interesting one. About, and I mean, we can spend the whole afternoon talking about that, about the sort of having the critical science view, and then, you know, in the other part of the world I live in, which is more the political diplomacy world, you have to be also careful, not that you're saying the wrong thing, but if we sort of, what we don't want is a rhetoric and say this is not going to happen, because then we just give up. So you have to keep the focus and say the SDG matters.
We also need to understand that to achieve almost the SDGs, all of them, water is critical.
Undoubtedly. I mean, that you are so right. It's, I mean, in our country, globally, water is yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We have colleagues that are last two. I'm very sorry for taking the discussion. So last two, you and okay, and Mr. President, because of your presidency, maybe the last one. But please briefly.
Oh, greetings. I mean, Detroit. I have about. Colleague, I just first asked how the meeting outcomes be disseminated to indigenous communities, ensuring that they are accessible, understandable, and relevant to their needs and concern. That's her first question. For me, my personal question is on one of the thematic areas. Oh, by the way, sorry I didn't mention, I'm a first-year student. My name is Sandy, so I'm doing ICT. So my question is regarding the thematic area of open innovation. So we all do know that the issue of open innovation and open science, it's a multi-layered issue that one requires you know, an understanding of different IP policies that surround that. So my question is then the strategy in going into this discussion and understanding that we have all these different IP policies that are sort of standing at the barrier of achieving open innovation and open science. So perhaps my question is, what's the strategy around that? That's the second question. The third question, yes, cool. I'll just keep it here. Cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, and what I can also tell you, I mean, if you want to, if anyone has any questions which I'm not answering, my email is, I should have put it on the slide, but you can also get it from Aldo. So I'll be very happy to engage with you further and to answer your questions, because it actually relates to your first question, sir, and that is that we want to communicate. We don't want this to be a meeting in isolation. So a big focus of the meeting, including in Mpumalanga, will be public communication outreach. So a very deliberate media campaign, digital, printed media. We're going to have a specific focus on community radio stations, because we know a large part of our communities rely on radio as a primary source of information, and very importantly, also communicating not only in English, but in communicating in all of our national languages. So that has been a very deliberate focus, is that and it should be a communication in a sense of partnership, co-ownership, not government speaking down to communities. So indeed, those outcomes will be shared and widely communicated. And it's one of the reasons I'm here as well, is to discuss with Aldo and the colleagues this afternoon that how we do it, because obviously we also want to be guided by the university. Yeah, so where do we, you have pinpointed your finger on what clearly is going to be one of the sensitivities in any discussion on open innovation, because we know intellectual property is originally, I mean, it's actually a tool for sharing and working together, but now it's really used to protect. And countries are very, we saw that with the vaccines, for example, using that to protect access to knowledge. So from a South African point of view, we have always been campaigning that in the interest of development, for open access, doesn't mean that you do not recognize those who own the IP, but that specifically when there are, for example, like international emergencies, crisis, that there should be provisions which enforce compulsory licensing, etc. So that is part of our tactical thinking on how to do that. Of course, just to bear in mind, again, as I've said at the beginning, the G20 is not a lawmaking body. I mean, laws for IP is the World Intellectual Property Organization, but it has sort of have political impact. So yeah, we can perhaps enlist you as an advisor, because yeah, you've put your finger on what really would be some of the key issues. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear. Yeah. Thank you for that. And of course, you know, gender is not a priority just because we're having the G20. It should be something something we try and focus on every day, and that applies to all practices of discrimination and inequality, specifically in the science enterprise. So the focus of the seminar, very practically, is to bring the G20 together, to share experiences, to share insights into how, within our different national contexts, we, for example, look at how do we attract young girls in greater numbers into the science and technology and innovation fields, and trying to learn from each other how we can remove some of those barriers, because we know they can sometimes be explicit, sometimes soft barriers, which prevents women from having discriminates against them and having the full scientific career. So it's first of all a platform for sharing experience and insights into what different countries do. And I think as South Africa, we have a lot we can share in that regard. But of course, we can also learn from others. But it's not only in terms of scientific careers, but it's also the whole gender enterprise. How do we actually make sure that the research enterprise itself, the research themes, are also gender sensitive and not only looked at through the eyes of an old white guy like me? Because clearly that is not how we're going to make sure research serves South Africa and all South Africans. So the focus is also to then create through the participation, and there's going to be a focus on selecting and inviting young female researchers from different universities to participate in the G20 event, to also allow them to meet with counterparts from other G countries so they can build relations and networks, which will be good for their scientific career. But I think the point to emphasize, this is a priority, not because it's G20, it is a consistent priority for our government, and not only because it's the right thing, and it is the right thing, but that's if science in South Africa is going to prosper and achieve its full potential, it means it has to be inclusive and open to all, and it means we have to deal with the discrimination and barriers, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's economic stratification, whether it's geography. I mean, your point is very important. The person who's, I mean, we know that there is a discrimination to locations outside Gauteng and the Western Cape, even if it's not deliberately, it's because it's the inheritance we have from the past. So we need to proactively address that and seek to deal with that. But thank you very much for that. Yes, then because I enjoy this. So
I know.
yeah.
Well, I feel so guilty to truncate our discussion.
Yeah.
But,
No, thank you, Prof. I don't have many views today. I'm very quiet. I just want to thank Mr. Du Toit for this opportunity to get this perspective. Probably it has guided many of us, our opinion pieces on the G20. So thank you so much for the seminar. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you for, I know you are very busy, you have had obligations, and I really appreciate that you invested your time here, and you were an engaged audience. I do not take that for granted, so really all the best with your future careers and your studies, and I mean, you're mostly young, and this is, you know, for me, I'm stop now, although I won't go on forever, but if you sit in Tshwane and you work in these structures, where we spend a lot of time in meetings, etc. Meetings like this is very important because it reminds me always why we do what we need to do. And it inspires me with confidence in the future of our country, because I know it will be in safe hands with all of you. So everything of the best. Thank you.